The question is, why would Russia try to provoke the NATO bear at a time when it is struggling in Ukraine? You can't think militarily that they would want to provoke a fight. The nearest I can get to any form of logic there is that, in my humble opinion, that the only way for NATO to protect its airspace now, because Russia clearly is doing incursions, is to be more robust with its response. Anything that comes into NATO airspace is shot down, but also potentially now put a no-fly zone. Because if Russia can't be trusted not to put drones into NATO, then NATO has to protect its border by putting a buffer zone in. And that means a no-fly zone. And I think that justification, NATO's been wavering about whether to do this or not for some time. It feels to me we've got the greatest justification we've ever had. And therefore, why would Putin therefore seek to try to avoid that? Because once we do start it, we can gradually spread it across Ukraine. And I think that would be a major problem for Putin to wrestle with.
Yeah, well, it's interesting, and I think it was yesterday or possibly the day before, French commandos raided one of the ships that were blamed for this. We haven't seen any reports of what they actually found on it, whether they found it had been a drone mothership, as well as other things. But again, from an intelligence perspective, I think the ones that have come from Putin are trying to do two things. One, probe what a political response would be, and basically highlight how difficult it is to get a political consensus against Russia and how weak NATO's Article 4 is, because Article 4 is really just a collective waggling of the finger and a stiff letter, and there's nothing else there. And the second thing is to test not just the military response, because a lot of this happens over civilian infrastructure. So there's not an automatic military response to a drone incursion. It's a civilian security organization's response, and just to test that, and again highlight how weak it is. But then, as we learn the lessons from it, our defenses are being strengthened, and we're hearing talk of a drone defensive wall that the Ukrainians are going out and helping to train NATO countries in putting together anti-drone drones. Would you have thought 3 years ago that the Ukrainians would be coming out and starting to teach NATO nations about how to defend themselves?
It is fascinating, isn't it? I mean, there's a lot in that. I do think if you're going to be robust against Russia, I think what Putin has exposed is the political frailties of robust responses, because we get punched and therefore wonder, oh, it's not really nice to punch the guy back again. Perhaps we should give him a bit more time, give him a bit of counselling. And you sort of go, no. Back in 2015, Turkey, 2 Russian aircraft came towards its airspace, 1 turned away. As soon as it came to the airspace, a Turkish F-16 shot it down. Putin went apoplectic. There was diplomatic furore, but sure enough, the dust eventually settled, and never, ever since that time have Russians gone inside Turkish airspace. They know what's going to happen. We seem to be questioning ourselves every step of the way about what we should and shouldn't do. And I think that just exposes our frailties. I know quite a few people that are serving at the moment, and even they were saying, oh, we've got to be careful before we shoot something down in our airspace. And you're going, let's be clear. Russia is at war with Ukraine. Russia is deliberately provoking. Those MiG-31s, it wasn't accidental that they were in the airspace. As a former fighter pilot, they turned off the bit of equipment that identifies where they are. They were not talking on the radio. Modern fighter jets know exactly where they are.
So all the banter you used to get from us in the army with turning around complaining that you didn't know where you were and you're always heading something else, you're always late. What you're saying to me is you always knew where you were and you were always on time. So this was deliberate.
Well, yeah, that was the sort of 19 earlies, wasn't it? When both of us were rather younger, and
it was usually the helicopter force, and you had to hike out another 10 kilometers to try and find the pilots.
Well, yeah, and actually there was a lot of banter at the time, wasn't there? Because why would you join the army and get called?
Most of it was banter, and it was there deliberately to wind each other up. But you mentioned a no-fly zone, and we've clearly got a new air defense threat that's coming into the West. How complex is it dealing with drones in particular, given our air defense stance, and how easy or complex would it be to bring in a no-fly zone over parts of Ukraine?
Yeah, I think the drone thing is very interesting. As you know, when you and I were serving, part of our capability was you didn't showcase everything you could do to the Soviet Union because you knew they would develop a counter. So you had a lot of capabilities in your skunk works where you would have it ready to go should you ever need it. The problem about us doing a drone war, as has been proposed, is you suddenly put up all of your showcase all your capability and simply give Russia a chance to work out how it's going to get round it. And I'm not for that at all. I do think there's been some amazing revolutions. You and I used to work in the days when it was you develop an electronic warfare capability, the Russian would have a countermeasure, then you'd have a countermeasure. We're seeing that in the drone area today, and Ukrainians bluntly, from being just drones getting jammed, so they then do terrain mapping radar, then they get jammed, then they now fiber optic, can't be jammed. I think there's a pace of technology which we're struggling to keep up with. But I do think we're learning lessons. I think we have to be quite careful, though, is that this doesn't mean drone warfare is going to be the only way of fighting in the future. For our day and for World War II, World War I, the artillery was the biggest cause of casualties. Now it's drones on the front line. And therefore, if you have a large land border and you're expecting to do a land warfare, you've absolutely got to consider how you do the counter. For us as an island nation, I think it's going to look very different, a bit like Israel and their attacks on Iran. It wasn't much drone there. It was back to conventional, roll back air defenses, then use air superiority. And I think, therefore, yes, it's for a David versus Goliath battle, which you have with Ukraine. I think that Ukraine has been outstanding at developing a way of fighting back. Whether or not that endures in the long term is another matter.
Yeah, and how complex is it from a planning perspective to get a no-fly zone over even part of Ukraine, and what are the dangers associated with it?
Yeah, the problem with no-fly zone is, let's go right the way to the top, is that Russia really doesn't have any answer to Western air power. So we genuinely thought even the Russian aircraft they had were quite good. What's been very clear in the war against Ukraine is they've been singly unable to use that technology. So it's not just about aircraft. It's about aircraft. It's a people, spares, training, doctrine. It's the whole package of capability. And that's one thing it's exposed that Russia's pretty rubbish at. So the West has an asymmetric advantage. So that would appear to be a low risk way of just turning the dial in Ukraine's favor. Extend a no-fly zone over part of Ukraine. Russia would probably take pot shots at times. Therefore, the rules of engagement are probably the most difficult thing to work out. If they shoot at you, would you shoot back? If a Russian air defense system that was based on Russian soil was to fire a missile, can you fire something back? Because you'd be killing Russian soldiers on Russian soil. That might be seen as a bit of an escalation. But the point is that, yes, there's lots of complexities, but from a NATO air power perspective, it'd be relatively simple to do. And what it would do is it would cause a major bit of grit inside Putin's thinking, because at the moment, chatting to people on the ground, these glide bombs, the Russian Air Force is still having a devastating impact. As soon as you now put Western air power with missiles that can fire 100 miles, they don't know they're coming. And all of a sudden, it won't take many Russian fighters to fall out of the sky before suddenly they've got to rethink their tactics.
Yeah, and how important do you think it is that NATO steps up and European nations step up and show an aggressive line to Vladimir Putin and say quite clearly, stop messing with us?
I think this is one of the areas where, if it wasn't an interview, you interviewing me, and we actually had a bottle of wine on the table, we'd have a very lively debate about this. I have no doubt.
We'll do that, and we'll film it one day.
My own view is that so far, was it 3.5 years in, well over 1,000 days in, NATO has probably done enough to stop Ukraine losing, but not enough to help it win, or at least persuade Putin to stop. And if we don't do something else in the West, let's be really clear, Russia is advancing on the front line. Yes, its economy is taking a hit. Yes, the oil and gas industry is being targeted. But unfortunately, Ukraine is still losing people, and those people are relatively short supply. And it feels like there's a profound moment approaching for NATO and for the West. Do we continue to do what we're doing, but there's an inevitability that therefore that plays into Putin's hands? Or do we change the game and actually use our might, use our capability, not to start a war with Russia, but to confront Russia and stop it going any further? Because if Ukraine was to fall, That has profound implications for the safety and security of Europe. Estonia, Lithuania, Latvia, what are we going to do about those? Poland's spending a lot of money to defend itself. Less worried about that. But all of a sudden, I think you face an emboldened Putin if Ukraine falls. What's China going to think about that? What's North Korea going to think about that? What about Iran? I do think history will look back at this time. And you and I are both sort of war fighters, and the easy criticism is, oh, that's what they want to fight a war. And you go, neither of us, we've both seen the impact. Neither of us want that. But you stop a war by deterring your enemy, that the risk far outweighs the benefits. At the moment, we are not credible as NATO. We're not standing up. We're in the ring. We've got both our hands behind our back, and Putin's coming up to us every now and again and smacking us one.
You've been watching Frontline with me, Philip Ingram. If you'd like access to exclusive content, please subscribe to Times Radio membership and watch us on YouTube. But you can now get us as a podcast wherever you get your podcasts from. And don't forget, you can also listen to Times Radio for the latest updates on global affairs and read about them at thetimes.com. Thank you.